3.5 years ago, and many of us were here at a white tent just over there when Northland first unveiled this project to the city. And so 3.5 years ago when we really first started talking about it. And in that original plan, right over there, right kind of where the cars are, was going to be a 6-story parking garage with Marshalls underneath it, completely submerged underground, some really big buildings. And over the 3.5-year process, including an 18-month process with before the City Council Land Use Committee, this project has changed in really significant and I think really fantastic ways. And we want to talk today about this project to you and explain it and hear from some of our speakers about why we think this is so important. In my own view, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to do something really special with this parcel. And if you're not really familiar with it, if you're here kind of for the first time or not sure where it is, on your way out, head all the way down or look all the way down past the parking lot here, and you'll see really vast, empty, broken parking lots. Almost 23 acres, most of which is really just crying for something to happen. And we think it's really important. And so it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really do something special for Newton, but also a once-in-a-generation threat, because if we lose this vote on the 3rd of March, really, I think there's a real concern about who else would come into Newton and not just what would happen in this parcel, but what developer would want to come to Newton knowing that you could get a supermajority vote from the City Council and still lose it at a ballot referendum. So my name is Greg Ruthanne. I'm president of the Chamber. I'm delighted to see all of you today, so many friends and new faces here. We have a good program today. We're going to go through the project and hear a little bit why it matters to our 4 speakers here, and then take time for your questions. So I want to begin with our mayor, Mayor Fuller, who's really, her team and her staff has done an amazing job ushering this project and making it better every step of the way. And really, I think that's the key. It was a nice project originally, but it's a really special project now. So let Mayor Fuller talk about the project, why it's important to her perspective on it. And once again, thanks for being here this morning.
Good morning, everybody. Let's see how we can do this. You okay, Deb, if I'm crossing you? It's good to be here. Greg, thank you for hosting, for bringing us all together. Let me talk about 2 things. Then the first that I'm going to start with is talking about what I've heard for 10 years, first as a city councilor, first as an alderman, actually, then a city councilor, then as mayor, what I hear from our business community, but also from our residents, because they dovetail. And then I'm going to link it in an obvious way to Northland and why I would encourage everybody in this room not just to vote yes, but to actually persuade some people where this may not be on their mind at all to remember to vote on March 3rd and to vote yes. So what do we hear about as the challenges and the issues facing the city of Newton? Let's start with housing. And as Josephine McNeil always says, housing isn't about buildings. Housing is about people. For our firefighters, for our teachers, for Shauna's line cooks, for the barista at Central in Newton Center, for the person who works at Cook, they need places to live in Newton so that they can be part of the fabric of this community. And for those of you who have had kids in the Newton Public Schools, you know for our children, if they are surrounded by lots of people from lots of places and lots of different walks of lives, they will have a better life here in Newton. I happened to last night, Cardinal Sean O'Malley was here in Newton. I was lucky enough to go over, meet him, sit with him, and listen to him. He said something that really struck home. Catholic Charities also tries to build affordable housing. They opened a 100-unit building fairly recently, and they cut off all affordable housing, income restricted. They cut off the list when it got to 1,000 people who were applying. Over at 28 Austin Street, when we were doing the same thing, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who were left off, they couldn't even get into the lottery. They want to live here in Newton, take advantage of our fabulous schools. I would also say Marion Knapp, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but Marion is able, she found housing in the towers, an elevator building. We don't have enough elevator buildings. Marion's actually got the data for you if you want it. For our older residents who would love to stay here and be a part of this city in their senior years, but move out of that home ownership model, they need housing. So housing's the first thing I hear about. Second is all about traffic. Okay, raise your hand if traffic in Newton is driving you nuts. Okay. It's not always bad. By the way, I was over at NewTV, Jen Adams. When I left NewTV yesterday about 2:45, Needham Street was empty. Just saying. But traffic and the condition of our roads are, I was doing polling when I was running for mayor. Number one issue, fix the roads, fix traffic. The MBTA cannot do that alone. The city of Newton with NUMO and fixing our roads can't do it alone. That's going to lead us back to Northland. Third thing on people's mind, the angst of climate change. And what does that mean? I did bring show and tell if I can find it. Thank you to people like Peter Smith and others. We know exactly where our greenhouse gas emissions come from. If you could read this, you would see about a third of the pie is because of transportation. The cars we're driving. Next time you have to replace your car, buy an electric, just saying. The other 2/3 of this is all about our buildings. We have to build, when we're building new buildings, make sure they are green and energy efficient. It also, by the way, has a lot to do with open space and bike paths and walkability. That's all related to climate change. What else do I hear about? Make sure, Mayor, that you invest in our schools and, yes, invest in our roads. And there's Jim McGonigal, our DPW commissioner, and his chief of staff, Shauna Sullivan. This existential crisis is real, and it leads you back to why you have to vote yes for Northland. Sorry, I'm switching. Investing in schools and roads. You know what that's all about? It's just about money. And that leads you directly to economic development. Greg, you called this an economic development forum. Those words always never really quite resonate with me. They don't mean enough until right now I'm in budget season. I promise you we need vibrant villages and commercial corridors for our residents to be able to shop, for our businesses to thrive, but we really do need this to be an economically strong city, and we can't all do it by our residents paying for it. We need to bring the right kind of businesses here. I brought along our Moody's Investor Services report. Just came out, yep, Newton did get the AAA, but let me tell you what they're worried about. The limited ability to raise property taxes here in Newton because of Prop 2.5, and our large long-term liabilities for pensions and OPEB. We better lean into having the right kind of commercial tax base here to help solve this. Otherwise, it will be a problem. The other thing that, thanks to our Economic Development Commission, Greg Riebman at the Chamber, and other businesses who chipped in, we actually did an economic development plan for the city. So you know what it says? 3 things. It all links to Northland. Grow our commercial tax base by looking for opportunities in our villages and commercial corridors. And then listen to this second one. It's kind of nuanced. To support commercial development, make transportation improvements, and increase both the number and type of residential units to attract and retain a more diverse population. And then the third one's really discouraging because it's what Craig talked about. Make the development review process more predictable to attract investment. Guess what a referendum does if we vote no? By the way, we do need companies to come here and want to invest in Newton, and then we're going to put them through Deb Crossley's city councilor process and make sure it's right for us. We don't just say yes. Northland, housing, buildings that are green, economic development, 1,500 jobs, investment in the walkability here, thanks to the state. And did anybody read the tab yesterday? Go read Greg Riedman's article on what's just about to happen on Needham Street. The state's investing $30 million, Needham Street, Highland Ave. It's going to be much more walkable, bike-friendly. Doesn't solve the traffic problem, but it makes it smoother. And Northland's investment in that shuttle, if this is a no vote, you know all the traffic that we have on Needham Street? It stays with no solution. You get Northland here, any of us can hop on their free electric shuttle and get over to the T. That's the kind of last mile, first mile investment that we as a city and the state cannot do. We need organizations like Northland to do it. They also happen to historic preservation. We all love historic preservation. They're saving the mill building. They're putting offices in there. They're investing in small businesses. They're setting aside space for them at lower rents. So that's why you should vote yes. Let me just pivot for one last minute, Greg, if you'll indulge me. Here's what, when I talk to the no folks, here's what I'm hearing. Is there too much change in Newton right now? Too many additional places for people to live being built. So can our schools handle it? Can our road infrastructure handle it? And I think fundamentally it's an emotional question. Is the Newton we love being threatened? If you vote yes for Northland, are you undoing Newton? I've got to tell you, the reason to vote for Northland is to make sure the Newton we love stays intact and moves forward, changes with climate change, opens our doors wider to people of all means and all ages. We're going to build the school buildings, and we're going to have enough money for the teachers. This is voting yes. Whoever came up with this, they're right. Vote yes for Newton's future. This is a great project for us, for the people who live in Upper Falls, for the people who work on Needham Street, for Newton as a whole. It's good once they finish building it 5 years from now. It's good for us for 20 years from now. It's good for us for 100 years. This is what Newton's future is. A no vote, I promise you, the alternative is so unappealing. Northland has to speak for themselves. They've got 3 parcels here. Each can have a 40B, 646 units each, without any of the other good stuff that surrounds this. A mixed-use project here. I encourage anybody, get in your car or go for a walk. Don't just get out on Needham Street. Go drive around this lot and these 22 acres, and you'll know why you need to vote yes. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. So I mentioned a minute ago the 6-story garage that was going to be here. It's not going to be there anymore. It's all buried underground, and as you can well imagine, that's a big investment. And what that did was allowed for 10 acres of parks and a lot of open space and some smaller buildings. And that didn't just happen by accident. That happened through 18 months of tough negotiations with the city administration and the city council. Our next speaker, City Councilor Deb Crossley, is a neighbor of this project, but also sat through and led a lot of that land use discussions for those 18 months and really made this project better. It wasn't easy. Northland folks weren't always happy with where it was going. There was a lot of tough requests and demands from them. But I wanted Deb to talk a little bit about where that process was and why she feels this is important.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everybody. So I would have walked here this morning if it wasn't such a crummy day and it wasn't so early in the morning when I left. But I do walk here frequently. I walk to the little mini Stop and Shop. I live on Circuit Avenue, which is just the other side of Elliott Street, pretty much right across from where that little Stop and Shop is. Part of what's called the Hill in Newton Upper Falls. Everyone in Newton Upper Falls can walk here, and many do. The Greenway, which was put in about 4 or 5 years ago now, it's hard, thank you, is a heavily used pedestrian walkway and bikeway, as was our intention. About a dozen years ago, I'm looking for John Rice because he was part of a community conversation, and I know he's here, thank you, former counselor. But before he was a counselor, was very involved in our neighborhood in Upper Falls. And the Northland companies had a smaller vision at that time that they presented to the community. Bigger in terms of density, perhaps, much more commercial space, but it turned its back on Upper Falls. That was before we had the Greenway. And still, it was clear that was not what the community wanted. They said, we want something that will integrate with our community, that will bring us in, that will recognize that we're an important village. That's way back then. 3.5 years ago, I stood here on this site, just a little further back. That's an outline of what the site is today. We are, I don't know if I can do this, but on the middle of the Needham Street line. That's where we're sitting today. The Marshall's Plaza, you can see the parking lot and the Marshall's strip up at the top. That's okay. And we were just there in the parking lot under that tent, and former Mayor Warren asked if I would stand with him and talk about and my support for the project that was coming. We had the site plan, but it wasn't nearly as evolved as it is today. And I said, well, Mayor Warren, I will stand with you about and talk about the possibilities that this project could bring forward, but what I need to do is explain the public process that we will undertake in order to fully vet this project. So we did that. And of course, the number one issue was then, as it is now, how to manage the traffic, how to move people from this very interesting and compelling idea, but how to move people from there to wherever they needed to go, work, whatever. Fast forward. 2 years ago, this was a lengthy public process. 2 years ago, I think that Northland was about to file their project, and the city said, gee, we haven't completed a master plan for the Needham Street corridor. We think there needs to be a community engagement process to set forth a vision that achieves a broad consensus among various interest groups. And so the Northland team put down their project and said, okay, we'll wait. We will file after you go through this process. Dozens of citizens were seated from within the study area, which was the entirety of Needham Street, all the way up to Newton Highlands Village. Thank you. Mayor's always so prepared. All the way up to and including the Newton Upper Falls Village. And all of the neighborhoods, not just the corridor of Needham Street itself, but all of the neighborhoods that touch Needham Street and are affected by what happens on Needham Street. Dozens of people were seated at the table, representing not only people from all of those neighborhoods, but people from within those neighborhoods who represented the Newton conservators, who represented Green Newton, who care about the affordable housing and who are involved in the housing advocacy groups. All of those people were seated, as well as simply interested neighbors, area council members, and so forth. And we penned the Needham Street Vision Plan. And the developer team was represented in the room as well. There were dozens of citizens who attended these meetings as well, and there was public comment. And the project that had been proposed 3.5 years ago, and that might have been filed 2 or so years ago, was changed. It went from, speaking of housing, 940 units down to 822. And that was just prior to filing. The retail space was reduced. The open space was increased. There was a call for putting the wires underground, which they weren't quite ready to commit to the very expensive project of putting all those wires underground around the perimeter of the project. Then we started the public process in the special permit process. The project changed dramatically during the public process that is our special permit process. So once something is filed, it goes before the Land Use Committee of the City Council. A public hearing is opened, and our process in this case spanned 14 months. I believe there were 16 public meetings, the last 2 of which were strictly for us to pen and perfect the council order, which is the contract the city has with the developer to assure that all of the bars are met. So what happened throughout that process? You know, the opponents of this who did attend our meetings and who did speak, and I would say everyone was listened to seriously, and all constructive comments and new ideas were considered thoroughly and incorporated to the degree that we felt that it fit the vision. So I think the mayor just did a brilliant job of relating how this project, in my view, is the poster child for the vision we want to achieve for our city. We need affordable housing, or housing that's affordable to a wide range of income earners. We don't have that in the city of Newton. We don't have the diversity of housing types that we need. This project will make a dent, a serious dent, toward that end. We haven't yet moved forward sufficiently in terms of how we manage our built environment so that when we build, we create a place where we can shelter people, which is why we build, that also provides a wonderful environment, local environment, an environment at your feet where you can live, work, and play. We have not yet been able to significantly enough integrate those basic human needs. This project does that. The brilliance of this project is in part due to the development team's long-term view, their ability to think into the future, and that they have the patience, they have exhibited the patience that's necessary to incorporate all of the values that we hold dear. We haven't yet been able in the city of Newton to build the way we need to build our buildings going into the future. what do I mean by that? Well, as the mayor just said, 64% of our greenhouse gas emissions are because of the old building stock that we have and the fact that much of it is heating and cooling the outdoors, essentially. And we need to raise the bar on how we build our buildings to a much higher standard. We need to emulate what's going on in parts of Europe. You've probably heard of something called net zero construction, okay, or a net zero development or net zero building, which means the building produces, or the environment around it produces, as much energy as it needs to heat and cool and ventilate and so forth that building. Well, the highest standard of construction for new buildings is something called passive house. It's been used occasionally across the country. There's one small example of it in New England. I'm not going to forget exactly where it is. This developer, because of the work of our Green Newton Building Standards Committee, a group of volunteer citizens who are dedicated to our building properly going into the future, has embraced that concept. They actually, literally, in the middle of the project, they sent some of their people to school and they hired one of the premier consultants on this matter and embraced and committed to adopting this standard for their residential blocks. Am I going on to? There's so much I can tell you about this project. Okay, so let me just wrap up. Passive house construction, state-of-the-art stormwater management controls, an amazing amount of open space comprising 7 parks and playgrounds for use by everybody in the community, carefully designed edges that address the community on every side appropriately and appropriately scaled, and a transit management program that is incredibly robust. So if I'm out of time, I could probably spend another 10 minutes easily explaining how that transit management program works, but I believe we nailed it. And it's because of that process, and it's because of the willingness of the development team to engage and to collaborate and to negotiate and to adopt these higher standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Crossley. Sorry to cut you off. I want to make sure we have time for questions. So our next speaker probably doesn't need any introduction. You've probably ordered a burger from her. Shauna Guerin, proprietor of Dungaren's Food and Spirits, another local business right down the street from this project. It broke my heart this morning to see Shauna, because I realized with her, now that she's had shoulder surgery, she will not be able to replace David Price in the lineup. But I wanted to asked Shauna specifically to talk about what this means in terms of jobs, in terms of her workforce, and also the perspective of being a local business in the immediately abutting this large project.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everyone. I am here. I think my voice is significant. I'm 29 years in the Upper Falls at Dungaren's, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I would like to start by, imagine in a couple of weeks on St. Patrick's Day, when Dungaren's, hopefully after a sluggish spring start, is busy, crazy busy, and I have to say to Manny, can you stay late and just wait for the Irish soda bread to come out of the oven? Because I really, we're just so busy, I need you to stay and do it. Shauna, but if I miss the 59 bus, it's another hour before I get the next bus. And I left my house this morning to be here for 8 a.m., probably about 6 to get here. And now if I get on this last bus at 5, I'll be home by 7 or half 7. So just that is one employee who's worked for me for over 25 years, who is the salt of the earth, and I wish had the opportunity to live and peacefully coexist with us in the city of Newton. The mayor and Deb, they're amazing what they've said, but I have a completely different voice. I'm here today to ask you to support this project. I hope there's opposition in the room, because I really want you to hear from me personally that I face competition and a lot more, restaurants and other businesses in the area. But I also feel very strongly that the Northland developers are my neighbor. And neighbors, I'm going to lose this. Neighbors are very personal. Is it gone? Northland is a neighbor to me, and neighbors are, as Mr. Rogers would say, it's a personal thing. So I think you really want to know your neighbor, and when things are tough or things go wrong, you want to have a neighbor that is going to work with you or protect you, and be part of your community per se. And Northland, I know over the last 3 years, has worked so hard and has displayed to me clearly about their intent and their commitment to our neighborhood. And so I strongly urge you that I could sit here and tell you time in and time again about affordable housing, but I do sit in a pub every day and talk to people, and you can hear that we're losing a lot of all of our young future generation to Southie, to the Seaport District, because they want to live in a city where they can live, work, and play. And they want apartments that are affordable, that they can actually live in the neighborhoods where they grew up. But we just keep pushing them out, and we just keep taking all of those potential employees for me and moving them to the Seaport District or Southie. And I really think that people like Manny and people like, there's a million employees that have worked for me over the years that would have loved to have had an apartment with all the amenities. So, when you talk about the price of an apartment to live in the city of Newton, what Northland is providing for these people is 40% of that land is open space, 7 parks. We do so much business here at Braceland at the dog park. So much is conducted and so much happens. But what they've proposed for this site, I've looked at this site for the last 15 years. Believe me, what they're offering us is really something that you should all go back home, tell your neighbors, vote yes. And I'm asking you and saying, if you don't understand things about this project, or you're concerned or you're afraid, come to them. They have an open book policy. But I do feel that over the years, and I've gone through special permit processes, they are so difficult that the city has held them to the standard to make sure that they're not going to do anything to destroy your neighborhood. And everybody tries to hide behind traffic, congestion, noise. That stuff isn't really what you're afraid of. You're afraid of bringing a diversified neighbor into your community. And believe me, we need those folks, and they really will enrich our lives. So again, I ask you, please go home and tell your friends, tell your neighbors, talk about it. And the more you talk about it, we have bent over backwards talking about it in the pubs, and we hear constantly from the kids that they really just want to make sure that Mayor Fuller does her job and maintains safety in the community. So if we do have traffic or we do have congestion, make sure the police department is out there and that they're running, speed traps, or they're doing things that they're monitoring parking and doing that kind of thing so that we can maintain safety in our neighborhood. But don't close the door to our neighborhoods, because these folks are really great developers, and I find them as a really good neighbor. And I'm sure that the more you spend time finding out about what their intentions are, you will really embrace their hard work. So again, I ask you, please talk about it and go vote yes.
Thanks very much, Shauna. Our last speaker, Rob Gifford, has been a neighbor for 35 years. A Newton resident for 35 years, but a long experience in real estate. I'm going to skip the introduction, but a long experience in real estate investment, not in Newton, but elsewhere. But he certainly understands financing and development, and brings a great expertise to it. So I asked him to come in and talk about what this means for development in general and give us a perspective on this project. So
I want to focus less on the project, which I think is fantastic, and people have spoken to it much more eloquently than I can, and more to the implications of a no vote. And again, I do this. I don't do anything in Newton. I live in Newton. I've done a lot of financing of real estate development projects in other parts of the country over the last 40 years. But what are the implications of a no vote? And you sort of started off with a rhetorical question of what happens. And, I think what will happen is that no developer will go through the extensive process of a major project, the extensive process of review and improvement and refinement with the city council to get a zoning change and a special permit if they know there's a trap door at the end of it where the millions of dollars that they've spent to get to that point will be for naught, because that trap door, being a referendum, completely arbitrary, could negate all the good work they've done. And so what developers of large projects or major mixed-use projects, such as they will be in the future or should be in the future to fulfill the vision that we've talked about, what they will do is they will completely do an end run around the city and the city council to avoid that trap door. And they'll do that in one of two ways. They'll go 40B until we've fulfilled our 10% requirement, so which effectively allows them to leapfrog the city of Newton and effectively go directly through the state with some input from the ZBA, the zoning board, but basically taking our representatives out of the picture, again, to avoid the risk of a referendum, or they will go directly to the right size Riverside or right size Newton folks and negotiate a deal before they even talk to the city. And they will get a pledge from those people not to referendum whatever they come up with. And that's the only way that any developer is going to risk the millions and millions of dollars and many years to get a project approved. So, you know, you hear the expertise and the passion and the vision and the focus and the priorities that Mayor Fuller and Councilor Crossley bring to shaping and forming these projects. That's going to be lost. That's going to be gone. Our whole city representative system will be sidelined, and developers will either go 40B, leapfrogging, or they'll go directly to the right size folks to make sure they've got something. They're going to buy protection against a referendum. And so we as a city, our representatives, are going to lose control of the land use process for major projects for the indefinite future. And all of the great things that we are accomplishing with this Riverside, with Riverside, but with the Northland project, all of the objectives relative to open space, transit, walkability, housing, the housing that we want, the mixed use that we want, we will lose control of that process as a city. It'll go to the state, or it'll go to right size. That's my prediction. I say it with a lot of confidence, only because I see no other way that a developer or their financial partner will commit the millions of dollars for entitlement with the risk of the referendum trapdoor. So that trapdoor will be there because it's in our charter, but I think a resounding yes vote on March 3rd will be the best insurance that we can buy effectively to keep these projects, to keep this planning, to keep this expertise, to keep this passion, you know, relevant and engaged in shaping how Newton develops over the next decades. So the existential threat here, I think, is huge. The existential gain, I think, is huge above and beyond this wonderful project.
Anybody have any questions for anyone here? Love to hear your thoughts.
What is the timeline of the project? How long is it going to take?
We actually might need to defer to someone from Northland about the time. The question is, what is the timeline of the project? I know Peter Standish is from Northland. If you want to give us some idea how that works.
To be able to work through the rest of the design process is probably about another year. Once we get to that point, and probably even before we finish that planning, we can get in, start doing some site work, some demolition work, get that started, then we can get construction going. So the hope is that we'd be able to start that, again, assuming a favorable vote by first quarter of next year. How long from that point? So the first amount of construction probably would take 2 years, would be probably 3/4 of the actual vertical construction. All of the infrastructure will be done. At that point, we'd start that second sequence of construction, and that would take probably another 2 years. So you're probably looking at about a 4 or 5 year build-out period for the full project.
Other questions? Yes.
in a neighboring community in the Highlands, right near Countryside, and what I'm seeing from my neighborhood is Needham Street, Needham Street, Needham Street. And I just need, what are the talking points that I use to say, I understand maybe 4 years, the traffic will get worse, but what are the talking points to mitigate some of those traffic conversations?
So I think essentially there's a couple things. One is Mass DOT is about to invest $30 million starting this spring in renovating this road and making it better for walking and biking and driving, including smart traffic lights that will help move the shuttle buses that Northland is providing along. But in addition to that, I'm going to ask Councilor Crossley to just explain a little bit about all the different things, and maybe you could just summarize that were negotiated that Northland's responsible for in terms of traffic.
Thank you. So I get to talk about traffic. First of all, the project is designed to accommodate one-car living. A constituent complained to me that, you can't tell people how to live. You can't tell people they can only have one car. Well, that's true. You can't. But you can design a community that limits its market to people who want one car or car-light living. So only one parking space is dedicated to each unit. The affordable unit pricing comes with the parking space, but the other units are priced separately from the parking space. So if you want to rely completely on the free 16-hour-a-day, every 10-minute electric shuttle service and not have the burden of the expense of a vehicle, you don't have to. So there's an incentive built in. But then you have that free electric shuttle service that's available to anyone in walking distance. I would say walking distance because it's unlikely anybody else will use it. And that's going to be a shared ride service with a very comfortable, well fit up mobility hub that's designed into the project between Needham Street and the first street inside the project. And what else? There's underground parking, which is, and there'd be a valet service and so forth for other uses. All commuters and residents will have transponders in their car because we're going to be counting trips. The developer has committed to a maximum number of trips at peak hour. The shuttle service is going to make that happen. If it doesn't, if they exceed their number of trips, which are hugely reduced from the number of trips that would normally be calculated from a mixed-use development of this kind, a 37% reduction in the morning, I think it's a 58% reduction in the peak hour evening, and a number that I keep in my head is something like 289 trips during those hours. That's a really small number of trips, especially for a development of this size. The Nexus project, as it stands, greatly exceeds that number of trips. We have mostly residential, which creates fewer trips generally than commercial development. Supportive retail has been significantly reduced, which also significantly reduced the number of trips. And we're requiring counting of trips. So what happens if they exceed those trips? We go back to the drawing board with our planning department. We look at, do we expand the shuttle service? Do we have it go not only to the Green Line but to the commuter rail? What do we do? But that commitment is part of the contract with the City of Newton. It's the most robust and really unprecedented traffic management plan that the city has ever penned or ever even suggested of anyone. There's nobody else on Needham Street. There's nobody else in Needham who's sending us a lot of their traffic. The western suburbs, as we know, are responsible for 70% of the traffic on Needham Street. That's huge. So this is going to have a very light impact, much less than what would happen here by 40B development or developments, much less than what the traffic would be if it was a commercial development entirely.
I also just follow up and talk about Manny. I haven't met Manny, but I know Manny. It means Manny, who's over at Dungarren's, can walk here and hop on the shuttle and have another opportunity, another way to hook in. He doesn't have to it's the 59 that I bet he takes, right? The 59. So it's, doing nothing, voting no. We already know traffic's bad on Needham Street, right? And we're strategic about what hours we go and what we think about it. This at least gives us an alternative, plus it's surrounded by everything else that's good. So it's one important aspect. It's not the reason to vote no.
Absolutely, go right ahead.
I think it's also important to recognize that the development that they have here also really promotes this live, work, and play, which so many people, it is sought after. But what it provides is entertainment in your backyard. It has everything you need in your neighborhood. You have wellness. You have all of this here. So really, truly, people are moving to these city-like areas and doing that because they want all of that. And you don't you don't have to go too far to have all of these amenities that, quite frankly, you couldn't purchase. Most of these people that work at Dungarron's, work 2 jobs, whatever, couldn't buy $1 million home in Newton. But they would certainly pay market value for an apartment to live here that provides so many amenities. And again, their cost of living has been reduced because it's all happening right here in their communities. So I think it's looked over that these are what people really want to live in. And some of the people that I hear day to day objecting to this, quite frankly, are not the people. They're afraid of it, but they're not the people. They're not the future of who is the consumer of this product. And this is really what people want. And you're crazy if you don't hear it. Ask your kids or ask people. This is what people want to be living in, and this is what they want in their community. 29 years at Dungarron's. Do you think Avalon provides that up the street? That building, I mean, look at what, and all of what we put them through to go there. This is creating 7 parks. Just everything about it. You can go have a drink, have a glass of wine. You can go have dinner. You can go work out. You can go meet your neighbors. So I think it's really something that's overlooked.
Thank you, Shauna. And I think, I'm not sure if you mentioned subsidized T-passes for residents. And right over, just the other side of this building is going to be a 1-acre public green park where we can have events. And there really is nowhere in Newton right now to do that, where you could do a large kind of thing. I mean, and those kind of gathering spaces that will be here are really important. And just as important to the chamber and to anybody among us here who's been challenged looking for real estate is the wonderful Sacco Petty building, an old brick and beam building that's going to be 180,000 square feet of brick and beam office for small and mid-sized companies. It's such an important piece of the real estate pie that we're missing right now is that kind of office space. It's aspirational for companies. Next question. Yes.
Hi. I hope you're pointing to me. I want to thank you for your very clear and passionate defense of this project. I am in a butter, so I appreciate everything you're saying. But in the interest of fairness, I'd like to hear from somebody from right size Newton what they feel is the right size. I don't see that in any of the literature. All I hear is right size, but what is the right size?
When obviously we don't speak and can't speak for them. The one thing I can tell you is that many times over the course of this project, Northland reached out and tried to meet with Right Size to have that very discussion, and they always declined. And there was a meeting even after the ballot referendum was set on January 2nd that was set up that Right Size declined to meet. So it's a fair point. There really has not been, in my view, and the Right Size people have never said what they would have found acceptable. And it seems more obstructionist than anything. Next question. Jean, you want to?
Yes, I'm Jean McKnight. I serve on the Needham Planning Board, and I came to hear about this project, but I'm very impressed with the planning process that went into the project. And I hope that we in Needham can learn from your experience, and I'd very much like to get a copy of the contract that referred to. We are focusing on the Muzzy site right across the highway, and we've had the disappointment of having that rejected by town meeting. It got a majority vote, but not a 2/3 vote. And we're going into another year-long planning process for that site, and I very much hope to learn from what you've done.
Thank you. Gentleman in the gray shirt there, go ahead.
I'm very impressed with the idea of using transponders to count trips, but how will you count Lyft and Uber? You know, my experience with friends who live in a no-car, single-car property is that there are more Uber trips than there are car trips. And a parking space in those condominiums sells for more than an apartment when you limit parking to one.
We're actually counting trips 2 ways. I didn't go into the second way, which is actually some of the folks who were feeling negatively toward this project asked us, and we took it on, and the developer took it on, to count trips, all trips in and out of the development as well. So there's a maximum number of trips that may happen in and out of the garages, so all the parking is underground for residents and commuters. There's a maximum number of trips that may happen combined at the 4 ways in and out of the property, the 4 egress for vehicles. So any vehicle that comes in and out of this development is counted, in fact.
Thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Yes, sir.
Me?
Yep.
So I heard 1,500 jobs created by this project, which is amazing, fantastic. I assume those are the full-time, ongoing jobs. But I also heard 5 years for construction. There has to be a significant number of jobs created over 5 years to build the project too. Can Northland or someone speak to how many jobs we're creating to build it?
About approximately 3,000 construction jobs.
Somebody else? Yes, Lynn.
Hi, I'm Lynn Cohen-Friedman. I'm a commercial broker with Convise Property Group. In a nutshell, can you tell me the amount of square footage for the office, how many apartments, how many square feet for retail? Just a quick little overview.
The 180,000 square feet in the Sacco Petty Mill building is what's going to be commercial office space. So it's basically refurbishing and retenanting the existing structure. 800 units of housing, Studio 1, 2, 3s. I remember that's only 5% 3 bedrooms. I can't remember the other numbers, sorry. All online. 115,000 square feet of supportive retail. So first floor of most of these buildings is going to be retail, restaurants, service businesses, small shops. 10,000 square feet, in fact, will be dedicated to non-franchise type businesses, small business. That number, in fact, I think it's important to note, was basically cut in half in order to provide the right amount, talk about right sizing, the right amount of retail that can be supported by the amount of the feet on the street and that we need to support their basic needs. And that, I think, just as a point, that's only 40,000 square feet more than what exists on this site today in its current state in terms of retail.
Thank you. And I wanted to mention that the Chamber feels really strongly that that 10,000 square feet subsidized below market rate for local businesses is really important, retail businesses. So anybody who has a local retail business, and Tom from the book fairs here can tell you all about it. The challenge of finding a space and being able to find a space you can afford, having space dedicated to that at a reduced rate is really important and significant. So in one last quick question, I want to bring up one more person. Yes.
I'd like to know what's going to happen in terms of the schools. Will there be new schools built, or will the kids go to Newton South? I'm a Newton North retiree.
The question was, so what about our schools? If we invite more people to live here, how are we going to handle this? Will we have seats in our elementary, middle, and high schools? Will we have the money to support the additional staff if it's needed? I got to tell you, this is something that's really top of mind for me. As this development, as a Riverside, as a Riverdale, as other developments come forward, I feel it's probably the most important part of my job that I have right now. We've got something really unusual happening in Newton, which is the number of students in our schools right now is declining. We've had the second year of a row. We don't know if that's a trend or a blip. We're looking at it very carefully. We had a demographer come in and do a study for us, not just for the next. Our school system does a great job of projecting the next 5 to 10 years. We went out 20 or 30 years and tried to understand what's happening. We will make sure that we have the right number of seats and the right number of educators in our system. I am actually more worried about declining enrollment than growing enrollment. We know growing enrollment. Claire Sokoloff was on the school committee in that 10-year, it was actually a 13-year period where enrollment kept growing and growing and growing. That's a tough problem. Declining's worse, actually. You have all the fixed costs. So we will make sure we have the financial resources in the schools to do that. And stay tuned. There's a lot of investment needed in our schools. And if we need to grow capacity, we will. Yes, I will say sometimes as mayor you interject yourself. This is largely a city council process, but I actually did step forward and turned to Northland and said, for the first time ever in the city of Newton, we want a developer to give a payment towards our schools. We need to rebuild Countryside, which is the elementary school closest to here. And they are ponying up $1.5 million towards that cost. First time ever it's been done.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, go ahead.
So Claire Sokoloff, in fact, is the person who gave me some numbers a couple of weeks ago about the Countryside School. Turns out right now the Countryside School is at about 413 students, and it has 20 classrooms. It's only using 19. They're expecting a further decline next year, and they'll only be using 18 classrooms. So the school closest to us, and of course all the students who will be generated by this project will not attend the Countryside School. They'll be across the board in age, right? But so this is real, that we're already beginning to experience that decline.
Can I just add one other statistic, which I think is powerful, which is the Newton Public School most recent enrollment report shows that over the next 5 years, there will be a decrease of over 200 students in the Newton Public Schools. That factors in the 160 students who are predicted to come in with the Northland project, and it also factors in other developments, larger developments that are on the horizon. So I think the real threat, as Ruthanne and Deb point out, is our enrollments are projected to go down, lower birth rates, fewer people being able to afford to move in, people don't have nowhere to go to move out of their homes. So the real threat is really declining enrollments. This project has been factored in to the school's enrollment projections, and even still enrollment is projected to go down.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Claire. So we have coffee, bagels, and plenty of opportunity to continue this conversation. Don't go yet. We have one last speaker for you. I did want to mention the coffee and bagels are from a place right across the street called Pressed. And if you haven't been there, go there, check it out. It's really an example of what an aspirational change we can have to Needham Street. It's modern, it's bright, there's lots of young people that are there. They've been open 2 or 3 months and they're expanding already. It's just an example of really where Needham Street could be and this community could be if we allow ourselves to move forward. So what I'd like to do really briefly is just introduce you to Allison Sharma. She's the resident in Newton and the chair of the Yes for Newton's Future campaign. Let Allison wrap it up.
Thanks, Greg, and thank you all for coming to learn more about this project tonight. I was obviously in favor of the project already when I agreed to chair the Yes Committee, but I have to say, the more I learn by attending house parties and events like this, the more unbelievably enthusiastic I am that this project is fantastic for Newton, and it just has to happen. So for all of you in the room who agree with me, I would love to ask on behalf of the campaign for your help in spreading the word. I mean, it's a matter of getting the facts and the information out there. So we have converted many, many voters on the street who thought they were going to lean no, and you just need to talk with them and set the story straight. And it's like, oh, this is a great project. So I encourage all of you to do that as you leave today. 2 other things. One is Brendan is going to be filming some little short video. What do you call them? Social media testimonials. Testimonials, yes. And he's going to be over there. If anyone's willing to stay for 5 or 10 minutes and just do that, they're super quick. That would really help us out. The other thing is Dan over by the door there has sign-up sheets. You can sign up to get on our email list, to take a lawn sign, just keep in the loop on what's going on the campaign, because like I said, it's just about getting the information out there. This is an easy sell. It is just so obvious that the yes vote is the right vote here, and thank you for your support. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great morning.